All the screens went scary blue, as they do when it comes up in coding. And it was a line that said something along the lines of, access to your data is encrypted and you need to buy the encryption key from us. The cost is $1 million worth of Bitcoin.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Semoto Podcast. Today with us, a good friend of mine, Matt Green from Lawrence Stevens. How's it going, man?
Yeah, how you getting on? You're right.
No bad. Happy to have you.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Long overdue, this one.
Yeah, I think, so I had you on a recording that we put out a few months ago now. So it's nice to be invited onto Semoto.
Amazing. Thanks for joining us again. So Matt not only is one of the early supporters of Semoto and mentioned a good friend of mine in the company, but he's a bit of an institution in the UK and across the industry. He's a lawyer. He's an asset recovery lawyer. He works for a great company. I'll pass the ball to you, Matt. Tell us about yourself, your background, and your company.
Yeah, so I am the head of blockchain and digital assets at law firm Lawrence Stevens. My practice is as a lawyer, as a litigator. So what does that mean? Largely, it deals with, or I deal with, complex and international or multidisciplinary litigation concerning digital assets, crypto assets if you're in America, and DLT. Normally, it's following a hack or a scam or some sort of misappropriation, which includes insolvencies and matrimonial proceedings where people just can't get to assets that they think exist. I'm able to trace those funds along blockchains with the help of certain experts and then look to recover those through the court systems. And there are court-sanctioned methodologies that we can use that are now tried and tested to recover those assets if certain questions are answered in a particular way. So a lot of these cases are enormously fact sensitive. I never promise people that we will 100% be able to recover these assets. But normally when we have a criteria that is fulfilled, then we can pursue a claim. Outside of that, I used to be largely an intellectual property lawyer, so copyright, trademarks, and tech. And that's how I got into all of this. So I also try and help individuals and businesses deal with their intellectual property disputes in this space as well.
I was going to say your law firm covers quite a lot of ground as well. Obviously, blockchain is your bread and butter, but people can reach you for a few other topics as well, right?
Yeah, I was delighted the other day, actually, to see, I got an email from someone who said, I found you on ChatGPT as, I typed in crypto blockchain lawyer London best or something, or who is the best crypto lawyer in London. And he had a regulatory issue that he wanted resolved. Now, I'm not a regulatory lawyer. We have a team of regulatory lawyers who can help. There is Asim, a colleague of mine, and Rick, who's head of regulatory, and they deal with a lot of the FCA inquiries that we have as well. But what was nice is usually as a law firm, you're always trying to get SEO. So when someone types you into Google, you come up as one of the first page hits. What's nice to see now is that the data scraping in whatever ChatGPT uses comes up as well. So it's not just SEO anymore. It's also people's reviews and experiences dealing with myself and my team that has meant that we appear in ChatGPT now.
And this is what Semoto is all about, to really give a highlight to the top players in the space with the top review. You are one of the highest ranked in our platform for good reason. You have worked on some incredible cases. Now, Matt, what asset recovery looks like in the blockchain, the digital asset world?
Yeah, so look, I'll start from the top because there was a case that I worked on, it seems now many years ago, it seems like a lifetime ago, that sort of started this all off, where a hospital in Canada got essentially hacked. And ransom was demanded. So someone clicked on a link, I believe, in a Canadian hospital. All the screens went scary blue, as they do when it comes up in coding. And it was a line that said something along the lines of, access to your data is encrypted and you need to buy the encryption key from us. The cost is $1 million worth of Bitcoin. The hospital obviously called their insurer. Their insurer was based in London. And the insurer, via its sort of emergency response team, negotiated it down somewhat, just a little bit. I think it ended up being $900 and something $1,000 worth of Bitcoin. And they transferred the money to the hackers. So it was a ransomware attack. The money was paid, and luckily access to all the computer systems and the data was reinstated. And that's a good thing, I guess, because if criminals are going to hack you and they want your money, it's better to know that you're going to get it back, because if you don't, we're going to pay because it's a lose-lose. The London-based insurer then inquired, because they were the ones who paid. They had a subrogated claim because it was their money ultimately that paid out. And they asked, can we sort of trace these Bitcoin? Because we hear blockchain allows you to trace stuff. And that was back in 2019. And we had a company, a very well-known company, Chainalysis, who now largely provide not only data, but software to investigators. Back then, when they were a much smaller company, they provided the expert evidence to show that the money had moved from the London insurer across the blockchain to Bitfinex and the BVI. And they were able to determine in expert reports why that was the case and the flow of funds. And back in December 2019, we were asking the court, with the help of friend barrister Darragh Connell, who's at Maitland Chambers and is excellent. Now he's highly ranked as well. He's been doing a lot of work in this space. He had to ask the court for a proprietary injunction. So an injunction is a court order compelling someone to do or not do something with specific property. And the idea was we wanted the court to prevent the movement of those Bitcoin that had landed at Bitfinex. Now, at that point, there was some academic disputes around what property was. So to get a proprietary injunction over property, we had to determine whether Bitcoin and crypto assets at large could fall into that category. And there was a paper about 2 months beforehand by the UK Jurisdictional Task Force that argued that crypto assets could be property. So there's things that are tangible, it's property, so your phone, glass, your car, your house, or things that create legal rights. So a property may well be debt of some kind. And crypto assets didn't neatly fall into either of those, but the UK Jurisdictional Task Force said that crypto assets could at large be property. So we asked the judge to consider this, and the judge gave us our proprietary injunction. So at that point, crypto assets became property, and it was all very exciting, and barristers and academics alike were excited, and no one else really cared because it was December 2019, and if everybody cast their mind back, that was the start of COVID. So how does this all work, and what did the industry do next? I was banging on the doors of other insurers at that time, trying to tell them that we had now found a way, at least as a start, to recovering ransoms paid. And I was in the offices of big insurers who were all very excited by this prospect. And then COVID happened and I fell down the chain of things that were important to insurers as the world was in meltdown. So what have I been doing since? It's largely been helping clients who are either high net worths or businesses recover their crypto assets following a fraud or following a hack. And the fraud largely is social engineering. There's a really ugly term called pig butchering. Not a big fan of it, but it's a term that's used widely. It's a kind of social engineering whereby someone convinces a victim that they are legitimate, and then they socially engineer over time, fatten up the pig so that it can be butchered. Unfortunately, there are cases almost weekly that we get inquiries where people have either sent money via dating apps, via certain vulnerabilities in their personalities. We had a lady, I'll tell you afterwards, whose husband died of a heart attack, and she joined a Facebook group and ended up losing £700,000 worth of tether in that group because she was vulnerable. We had an inquiry this week about an individual who set up a crypto.com account, and he immediately got a text message from someone who said that they were from another company, and they helped this individual transfer under the pretense that they were an investment platform, a lot of money. There's also very basic.
If you can jump in on this one, that's quite interesting because people associate the hacks to overcomplicated tech-focused attack. Yeah. Sometimes is the opposite of it, like it's either brute force or just, as you said, social engineering. Even if we think about the Bybit one, I mean, it's nothing over sophisticated, right? So people have to be.
So, Marco, the maths isn't wrong, or the tech usually isn't wrong. It's not the vulnerability is normally the human being, and whether that is completing a multi-sig blindly, as I think what happened in Bybit, where all the transactions were authenticated sort of automatically, they just sort of let them through, to actual social engineering, or very basically, we had a guy a couple of weeks ago who just received a phone call saying that they were from Binance and that his assets were under threat. And, a few hours later, he'd had his Binance account emptied, his Ledger account emptied, his Coinbase account emptied, and they lose a lot of money. People lose their pensions, their savings. Largely, this happens to people who are a little bit older. But I try and tell on these initial calls the victims that this can happen to everybody, because it can. Whether they are individuals who've just got into this space and have been maybe a little naive, to top execs in crypto companies who are either not paying attention, or the scams are really sophisticated. So I always try and make sure that people feel as though, yes, they may feel shame, but ultimately this happens to everybody. Shouldn't feel, I don't know, they shouldn't feel as though they've been assaulted in some way that is irreconcilable, and that things possibly can be done.
Matt, a question for you. I mean, and I know that is quite wide, so we can probably not cover it all, but can you give us an idea of what are the most typical scams and hacks in, you mentioned pig butchering. What else is out there that we should consider? I mean, what are the most common?
Yeah, so there's a lot of social engineering. There's quite a bit of hacking. There was a case I worked on now a few years ago where this individual had about £1 million worth of Bitcoin in Atomic Wallet, and that was just hacked by the North Koreans. And then we had to use the usual techniques we use to follow that money and trace and then freeze funds. So hacking occurs a lot. Scams occur a lot. There's also sometimes issues around businesses where there's been a bad actor in the business and they tried to obfuscate funds. There was a case I worked on a few years ago where these individuals were trying to set up a Bitcoin ATM company, which of course wouldn't be legal now, but it was in the very early days. And one of the individuals who was given some money to invest in this company to buy some hardware immediately turned it into some crypto assets and decided that he thought it was clever to hide it, and just sort of said, oh yeah, sorry. But it was very easy in that respect when there was a company dispute to show that the money had moved from the account that he was paying into off into a private account that he held. So there's corporate disputes like that where people try and obfuscate money. There are insolvencies where there's a guy at the moment who's come to me to try and get in the queue for FTX, for example, as one of the creditors. Of course, in that case, you had millions of customers of FTX storing their money in the exchange. The exchange went down, and that is another kind of asset recovery. It's all part of insolvency, and it will happen in the US. But of course, there are victims, if we can call them that, in England who need some support as well. What I'm also seeing more is inquiries relating to divorces and family disputes. My understanding is that when you get divorced, and I say that because I haven't been divorced, I'm not married, so I don't know. But apparently when you do get divorced, or if you get divorced, you have to provide a schedule of your assets. And there seems to be this trend that those who are holders of crypto assets are either not including them or including sort of some of them. And normally the other party says, well, I know that my partner had this stuff. I know they've got these riches locked away on some device. And a lot of the time that seems to be the case. And it's quite easy to see.
We're focusing quite a lot on the hack part, but there are other cases where asset recovery is needed, and divorces might be one. I assume when people die and in the case of an inheritance, they try to trace assets. Is that something that you cover as well? There are any other cases that are not as painful as maybe brutal acts or stuff like that?
Yeah, I know that there's a movement. I'm going to try and find his name while I'm doing it, because let me have a quick look. Because there is a company, yes, Asset Pass, who I believe that's their job. They try and create infrastructure and policies that allow individuals when they have died
to Asset Pass.
It's Asset Pass. I don't know. I assume you know those guys very well. And Paul Rossini, he does this sort of stuff. I know there was many years ago now, 10 years ago or so, there were all of these movements to try and get Facebook to, what were they called? When someone had died, it wasn't immortalized, the account. It was a word that has escaped me. But essentially it would mean that parents or family or partners could take control of an account if somebody had died. And I think Asset Pass are trying to do sort of similar things with actual crypto assets at this stage. So there's all sorts of disputes that can happen. I normally help victims, but I have, of course, helped crypto exchanges and companies as well. There was a case a little while ago where a company was operating using, I think, the Kraken infrastructure. I believe at the time. And they just received a note from the exchange saying, your account has been suspended. We're not going to tell you why. Goodbye, essentially. And they had a lot of money trapped, and then they couldn't operate as a business. Long story short, we found out that the Secret Service had issued an order in the US, and after some negotiations, they were able to recover their funds and continue trading. It sort of works in as much as wherever there is a dispute around crypto assets at any point, we can step in and help. And we have a really good, I'd like to think, a really good reputation in working alongside some of the larger players. So I understand that, companies like Binance get probably millions per month of inquiries of individuals who have lost money or companies who have lost money. And we find a way to cut through all of that and get some good responses from a lot of the big players that otherwise consumers or businesses, private businesses, struggle to do.
Interesting. Now let's try to give some alpha back to the audience. What is the roadmap? What is the action to be taken list type of, if we have to think of an app, what people should do in the first 72 hours?
Yeah, so there was an article written by a few of us at my firm. I can send you the link because it's a written sort of catalogue of what to do. But let's just say that let's just say you've been hacked, for example. One of the immediate things you want to do is try and, number one, review access logs into your account so you can see whether someone has obtained access. You can do that via emails, or they normally have an ability to see the history of your logins. And change your passwords as much as you can, whether people have keychains or password managers. It's important to try and change them immediately to make sure that there's no continuing loss suffered. You need to try and preserve then as many documents as you can for the purposes of helping lawyers and law enforcement or police deal with this. Do not delete anything because there could be some really important code within whatever infrastructure you're using that can help. So first of all, change all your passwords. Don't delete anything. When you have a moment, call someone like myself, a lawyer who can act urgently on this. And that means that we can very quickly determine where the funds have gone. So the quicker I'm able to obtain transaction hashes from a victim, the quicker we're able to follow that money through to see where they've ended up and to then put on notice the parties who have received those funds.
What about law enforcement, Matt? At what stage is it better?
Well, you beat me to it, because when you've then taken a breath and you've at least got the process running for asset recovery, it's important to go to the police. Now, people usually don't feel as though that is something they want to do because they feel as though the police won't help them. And it's unfortunate that is the case, but even obtaining a crime reference number, filing it with action fraud, is enormously helpful. Two reasons. Number one, a lot of the parties who end up receiving funds say, we will deal with law enforcement. And if we don't have evidence to show that at least there's been an attempt to engage law enforcement or the police, then a judge, when we get through to the civil stage, the things that I work on, will ask that question. So if we can say we wrote to the police, we've filed a report and nothing's been done, then we can tell the exchange we've tried that and we can tell the judge we've done that. The second reason why it's important is because as time progresses, the police are taking a more active role. As they continue to get trained and understand how the tech works, they are taking an active step. Now, police forces are local. So if you are in, say, Nottingham, you can't, unless there's very good reason and I haven't seen it yet, try and instruct the Met Police to help you. Well, I've got two cases now where the police are taking an active role, in as much as they are cheaper than people like me who are lawyers. In fact, they don't cost any money at all. And they have been able to be a little bit more forthcoming in what they can do. And in the other case, where the police are involved, because they have limited resources, we can gather evidence privately much quicker. And we can then provide them with all the documents with a neat bow on top for them to review and use their power. So we act very quickly, or as quickly as we can, subject to the client, to try and recover funds. They will look at the file as and when they can and slowly build a picture of who the individuals who have conducted this and laundered the funds are. It may take a little bit longer, but then you've got a two-pronged approach. You're looking for me, who helps with recovery of the funds themselves as quick as we can, and the police who look to put people behind bars. And they're two different things. Most of the time, people want their money back and they don't normally care who the threat actor was. but the police often help. And I think that there's cases where there is a mechanism under the Process of Crime Act amendments of last year that gives the police lots more powers to seize assets, that you have to go to the court under the criminal regime and seize assets. But sometimes they don't have the inclination to do so.
What I was going to ask you, I assume it's quite important as well to notify if that affected your account with an exchange. You probably want to notify the exchange, you want to notify the custodian as well to try to take some
Yeah, so
right?
sometimes, I mean, it is helpful. You want to notify as many people as you can because you want to cast your net far and wide. And there was a case recently whereby that we're working on now, so I can't say too much, but it involved a hard wallet provider who had suffered a hack years ago. And the question was the hack that our client had suffered caused by a data leak that they'd suffered? So we had to consider writing to that hard wallet provider as well. So if, for instance, you have hacked, it is also worth writing to that provider, whether it is a central exchange, a hard wallet provider, or even if it's the DeFi protocol somewhere along the line, someone's going to try and usually there is an email account that you can write to. I say usually, but it's worth putting as many people on notice as you can that you have been hacked or have been scammed. And then we can assess from there what the facts are to determine who we want to go after. Now, when I say go after, it's important to note that unless there has been wrongdoing from the outset, it is unsuitable to go after crypto exchanges and service providers. And the reason is there was a case last year that did this. It was quite controversial. Or to go back a moment, what you normally do is you sue the party, the customer of the exchange you ended up with the money. So say, for instance, the money's gone to Binance. You want to sue the customer of Binance. You don't want to sue Binance themselves. But you need Binance's help. They will help you enforce your injunctions and they will provide disclosure as to who their customer is. Last year, they decided this other case, and other lawyers, it wasn't me, had decided not only would they go after a customer, but they would go after the exchange. The reasons were not particularized. They were not clear. So actually, you have to balance who you go after. And what happened is that exchange, Big Cub in Thailand, fought back in the case and essentially proved that although their customer was a money launderer, that they had done nothing wrong. And the poor old victim had to pay the fees of the crypto exchange, which was a bit mad. So you don't, unless there is really good reason at the outset, you ask for the crypto exchange's assistance. You play it nice because there is no evidence that they've necessarily done anything wrong just by receiving funds. I can get into all the legal jargon about whether there is a duty of care for a victim by an exchange if they haven't done KYC, but that's a whole different conversation.
So let's go back to the original question, the roadmap of or how recovery works. So we covered the first 72 hours. Then what happened? So they have notified law enforcement. They engaged with a lawyer like yourself. Somebody's now tracing the assets. What comes next after running an investigation? What's obviously in England, for people listening from abroad, maybe they don't have barrister involved in the picture, but what will happen in the case?
So if I'm given the transaction hashes at that opening point, I'm able to then speak to an investigator and work out whether we are going to pursue this or not. And that thing that's super important is we take it on a granular basis. So we have a pre-action criteria that we use to ensure that we are not just going to run off to court, because it may well be that if the money has gone to a particular exchange, the money's not there anymore. And there's no point spending good money chasing bad money. So we run through a very clear process to broadly go through it. Has the quantum of loss been suitably large to make this economical? So if someone asked me to try and recover £1,000 of Flocky Inu, which they did last a few years ago, the answer is probably no, because court fees alone are thousands of pounds. If you've lost over £200,000 worth of assets, the court fee is 10 grand alone. So it's got to be worth it, plus legal fees and everything else. So number one, is the quantum large enough? Two, what is the asset? If it's Bitcoin, great. If it's a stable coin, even better to some extent, because we know it's not going to collapse. What we're trying to do is avoid the instance where the asset was worth £1 million on day one, and within 6 months it's a zero. And then again, it's not economical for us to recommend pursuing it. Not always the case. There are cases whereby people want their intellectual property back if it's meme coins, but that's a whole different topic. The next is about jurisdictions. I practice in England and Wales. We have the jurisdiction to act for claims that involve this jurisdiction. What does that look like? Number one, victim is domiciled here. If we live here, essentially, or if you have a passport and you live here, you're in Britain, right? Or you're in England and Wales. Number two is if the loss occurs here. So if someone from France is on holiday, they connect to a dodgy Wi-Fi in England and they lose their money, the loss occurred here and that should bring jurisdiction. The last is quite interesting, and I don't think has been dealt with substantively in court yet, but the last is when the threat actor purports to be in England. So what does that mean? It happens a lot in scams. So if the scammer purports to be in England, meaning if you're interacting with somebody who's using a +44 telephone number, if a website says that it's registered in England, even if it's very clearly not, you have a right to be sued in your own jurisdiction. And we can tell the relevant parties that we believe they're in England because we have evidence that they say they're in England. So once we have jurisdiction and once we have answered our pre-action criteria, we will then write to the service providers, the exchanges, once we've had our analytics done, which normally can happen relatively quickly depending on how complex it is. And we say to these exchanges or service providers that they have received proceeds of crime and can they help us? This letter goes out to draw a line in the sand so that they are on notice that they've received the proceeds of crime. And that's really important. Back in the day when this was done, people used to rush off to court and that didn't work so well because they weren't sure about whether they were going after any money, who they were going after, why. It was a complete swing in the dark. And actually, there's a Law Commission paper. I've got it in front of me. It's got a very catchy name called the Digital Assets and Electronic Trade Documents in Private International Law Consultation Paper, where they have tried to recommend bending the rules somewhat or creating some new rules to allow victims to find out more information about who's got their money before they bring a claim. Anyway, then once we've gone through this pre-action criteria and we've sent this letter, we make a determination altogether as a team as to whether this is pursuable or not. And we will go to court, and there's two things that happen simultaneously. Number one is these injunctions. So we ask for a proprietary injunction, thing that we spoke about earlier, that requires an injunction over the assets that have been received by individuals who we don't yet. We know that they exist because they are customers of exchanges, but we don't necessarily know their names. We can serve them in a variety of different ways, including, if needed, via NFT, which was a case that was done a few years ago, which was great. We ask for a worldwide freezing injunction. So if you think the money's gone to, say, Binance, you can see it go in. If the money's come out the other end, you won't know about it. But if that individual, the customer, has more money in a bank account or has more money in other accounts, worldwide freezer allows you, as the victim, to recover that person's funds, even if that money specifically is gone. So, Marco, if you steal £10 from me and then pass it on to someone else, they buy 100 different sweets with it and then eat them all, that proprietary claim is sort of disappeared because someone's eaten all these sweets. That £100 is gone. That doesn't stop you owing me £100. So that's what that worldwide freezer is for. And then we get a disclosure order against the exchanges. We try and include them as third parties. You haven't done anything wrong. There's been an investigation. We need your help. Normally they say, of course, we'll comply. We don't want to be helping criminals, especially use our platform. So absolutely. And they tell us who the individuals are, who are their customers, and we include them as named parties in our proceedings. That's the first part of it. Second part of it is we start a substantive claim, usually on the basis of unjust enrichment, breach of trust. There's a million different things that we can think about subject to the facts. And it essentially says victims' money has been taken. We've tried to mitigate the position by getting these injunctions, but ultimately they have come to these assets with unclean hands and we want them back. And any variety of things can happen after that. But once you start a claim, the other side, these individuals who have received the money, have to put in a defense. Now, I don't know about you, Marco, but I haven't really seen many criminal enterprises legitimately put in sensible defenses in high court proceedings. Normally what happens is criminal enterprises who get caught out, these things settle relatively quickly because this is the cost of laundering money. Sometimes you get caught. And that's not fine, but it's a relatively good outcome for victims because if all they want is their money back, and then we allow the police, should they need to take the file, review it, and if they want to pursue the individuals who have committed the fraud or have part of, or individuals who are part of the money laundering process, then they are entitled to do so. Now, in other cases, people put in defenses and they're not very good and things get resolved, or the defendants never put their head above the parapet. You can get what's called a default judgment, i.e. run out of time to put in a defense, or what's called a summary judgment, which is there's no reasonable prospect of defending this. You apply for both of those. In most instances, you get them in court, which basically says the victim wins. And then you apply for what's called an enforcement application, essentially compelling the exchange or the bank or whoever has assets to hand them over. And you can repatriate the funds back into England. Now, I always say in England, I have been on cases that are in other jurisdictions and I just help strategically. But if it's going to be me and my team as the boots on the ground, as the individuals who file stuff in court, then there needs to be one of those 3 jurisdictional cooks that we were talking about earlier. That is a very whistle-stop quick, very simplified version of how this works.
Amazing. As expected, I had a list of questions to ask you, but we're running out of time.
Yeah.
No, but first of all, thank you.
No.
Incredible amount of useful information. Speed is at the essence. People need to be smart, protect themselves, and contact experts. That's actually one of the reasons, as you know, I come from Elliptic, asset recovery and tracing. This transaction was part of what we were doing, obviously. If something bad happens, this is why also Semoto is in place. Jump on Semoto because you can find players like Matt, you can find other lawyers in other jurisdictions because obviously, as Matt said, he cannot cover every single country. You can find barristers, you can find, more importantly, investigators in different jurisdictions or tools like TRM, Elliptic, Crystal Blockchain that can support you in your own investigation if needed.
Marco, can I just sort of say here that now I think it was a year and a bit ago, maybe even coming up to 2 years shortly, whereby someone through Semoto made an inquiry. They'd lost a lot of money, made an inquiry through you guys. It ended up with my team. And without sort of going into too much detail, there was a judgment in that person's favor for, I believe it was £4 million. So this process works. When the individual came to Semoto, Marco put that individual in touch with people who he recommended. In that instance, it happened to be my team, and we've been working on it, and it's resulted in a positive judgment. In that respect, the process of going through Semoto does work.
Amazing. Thanks, Matt. Thanks a lot for that. So yeah, be quick, be smart, get in touch with a professional like Matt. Matt, thank you so much. Always a pleasure. Thanks for supporting us. Thanks for the great job that you're doing for the whole blockchain ecosystem.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Marco.
Amazing. Thanks a lot.